In Section 1, I asked you to define what is Homeland Security Intelligence. The answers I got were diverse and varied, yet none of them were wrong. So, what constitutes Homeland Security then? And how does it nest within the broader intelligence discipline? To answer this question, it may help us first to ask two other questions. What is intelligence and what is Homeland Security? So, what is Homeland Security? The statutory definition for Homeland Security is, and I quote, a concerted national effort to prevent terrorist attacks within the United States, reduce America's vulnerabilities to terrorism, and to minimize the damage and recovery from attacks that do occur. Since originally defined in the Homeland Security Act of 2002, this definition has been expanded and is currently defined by DHS as ensuring a homeland that is safe, secure, and resilient against terrorism and other hazards. This concept was expanded further in 2010 by the Quadrennial Homeland Security Review, which describes the Homeland Security mission as being enterprise-wide and not limited to the Department of Homeland Security. The goals and objectives of this enterprise is to prevent, to protect, to respond, and to recover, as well as to build in a security to ensure resiliency and to facilitate customs and exchanges. So what then is intelligence? A great deal of people think intelligence is nothing more than information that is secret. However, traditionally, intelligence collection and analysis is done both clandestinely and overtly. In reality, information is anything that can be known regardless of how it was discovered or obtained. Intelligence is a subset of this broader category of information, just like any type of information. What differentiates intelligence from other sorts of information is intelligence is specifically information that meets the needs of policymakers or other consumers. This information has been collected, processed, and narrowed to meet those needs of those specific consumers. The intelligence is an entire process by which it identifies and obtains and analyzes information. What separates intelligence from other information is this process. The process is known as the intelligence cycle, which is made up of 5 distinct steps. The first step is planning and direction. This is where the process begins. When policymakers or military commanders express a need for an intelligence information, an intelligence requirement is then set up. An intelligence requirement is an intelligence need that is specified by the decision maker, who then passes the request to an intelligence agency, where an answer is developed and then disseminated. This formulation sets the evaluation of intelligence requirements forward and is one of the most important steps of the intelligence cycle. Next comes collection. In response to the requirement, an intelligence staff develops an intelligence collection plan applying available sources and methods and seeking intelligence from other agencies. Depending on the organization and its access to sources of intelligence may include human intelligence, geospatial intelligence, signals intelligence, measures and signatures intelligence, and open source intelligence. We are not going to go into great detail of the differences between these intelligence collection methods or disciplines because these are covered in much greater detail in other courses. The next step is processing the information that has been collected, or also referred to as a processing and exploitation phase. This is where people charged with processing the collected information turn the raw data that was collected into a form usable for analysis and creating devices that can be used to carry the data to an analyst. That brings us to our next phase, the analysis and production phase. This is where the integration of the processed information is evaluated and analyzed and is prepared and turned into an intelligence product. Most intelligence organizations assign analysts to a particular specialty. Analysts may also develop requirements for collection of additional information and refer those back to those in charge of collecting information. Once all the information is collected, processed, and analyzed, the analysts are in charge with creating an intelligence product. When this is completed, the information is compiled into what is termed finished intelligence. This finished intelligence product is then distributed to the consumer. And a finished intelligence product can be disseminated in oral form, in written form, in graph form, or basically on any other means to communicate. After intelligence is disseminated, the consumer will provide feedback in the form of how valuable the product was, whether or not they have more questions, whether or not they have more information that they need. This creates new direction and new requirements for the intelligence agencies, thus starting the intelligence cycle all over again. In the most basic terms, intelligence is knowledge and foreknowledge of the world around us. Intelligence allows the consumers, ranging from high-level policymakers to frontline personnel, to make decisions, take actions, consider possible alternatives, and predict possible outcomes. Intelligence can consist of both classified and classified information. In the aftermath of September 11th, there was a realization that there was a new threat and new dangers the United States and the world was facing. These dangers were from non-state actors such as terrorist groups and transnational criminal organizations. As a result, there has been an increased emphasis placed on Homeland or internal security. As a result of this new threat, the Homeland Security Act of 2002 was passed. The Homeland Security Act did not define what Homeland Security Intelligence was, and as of this date, the term has yet to be codified as in law or defined in law. The Homeland Security Act of 2002 does define Homeland Security information as any information possessed by a federal, state, or local agency that, and I quote, relates to the threat of terrorist activity, relates to the ability to prevent, interdict, or disrupt terrorist activity, would improve the identification or investigation of a suspected terrorist or terrorist organization, or would improve the response to a terrorist act. DHS, as an organization, is designed to protect against all hazards. However, the focus of Homeland Security information, at least as defined in law, is counterterrorism. As illustrated below, Homeland Security intelligence can be more broadly interpreted to involve intelligence designed to protect against other activities such as narcotics trafficking, organized crime, and other threats having international support networks and groups seeking to engage in activity that could undermine U.S. national security. Prior to 9/11, it was possible to make a distinction between domestic intelligence, primarily law enforcement collected within the United States, and foreign intelligence, primarily military, political, and economic intelligence collected outside the country. The term domestic intelligence and Homeland Security intelligence are often used interchangeably by some observers. Depending on how one defines Homeland Security, This may be understandable. The two terms, however, are inherently distinct. That is, domestic intelligence could be defined as that which is collected, analyzed, and disseminated within the United States. Yet Homeland Security intelligence may be much more broadly defined without regard to geographical origin of the intelligence collected. The rationale for this integration of what is traditionally defined as foreign intelligence with what is thought of as domestic intelligence and the threats posed to the homeland by terrorist groups and national security threats collected outside the United States is very often related to the threat inside the United States and vice versa. One challenge of preventing such threats, such as terrorist attack, is bridging this foreign and domestic divide. As a result, the Intelligence Reform and Prevention Act was enacted in 2004. One of the purposes of the Intelligence Reform and Prevention Act was to integrate foreign, military, and domestic dimensions of U.S. intelligence into a unified enterprise and connecting the dots across this foreign and domestic divide. This act defined all intelligence, at least at the federal level, as national intelligence and has three subsets: foreign intelligence, domestic intelligence, and homeland security. But again, just like the Homeland Security Act of 2002, it did not define what Homeland Security intelligence is. This is not to say that policymakers, practitioners, and academics have not tried to define or at least frame their perception of what Homeland Security intelligence should be. Some similarities between these perceptions do exist. These include a fundamental belief that intelligence is the first line of defense for the nation. Threats to U.S. national security are largely, although not solely, of foreign origin, and there is a national intelligence role for non-traditional players, largely state, local, tribal law enforcement, as well as the private sector, a role in which they make contributions to prevent terrorist attacks and other acts directed against United States citizens within the United States. This description provides three models for Homeland Security intelligence. The first is a top-down, federally driven model where intelligence or INTs are dominated at the federal level, and a bottom-up state and local and private sector where thousands of state, local law enforcement intelligence collectors are dominant, and then some unique partnership that strikes a balance between these two models. The federally led top-down model, through which federal government intelligence entities provide raw intelligence and finished terrorist threat assessments to state, local, and tribal law enforcement entities. It is up to these entities to make independent determinations of whether the intelligence is actionable. However, intelligence gathered at the local level can also be used to advance the causes of national security, as state and local law enforcement can be viewed as a nation's counterterrorism eyes and ears. The alternative is a bottom-up model, through which intelligence is collected long before an event occurs and provides an assessment of the local threat environment in which a national security and criminal threat may become a reality, before a threat can become a reality, and this is then transmitted up to federal agencies for possible action. In reality, federal, state, local, and the private sector actors are both producers and consumers of intelligence. Homeland Security is not bound by any geographical constraint, level of government, or perceived mutual mistrust between public and private sector. That is, the approach recognizes no boundaries and is neither top-down or bottom-up. It involves values equally information collected by U.S. private sector owners of national critical infrastructure intelligence related to national security collected by federal, state, and tribal, local law enforcement officers, as well as the traditional intelligence agencies, which are collectively members and statutory members of the intelligence community. What this describes is, in reality, that there may exist a Homeland Security intelligence community that may include the 17 statutory members of the intelligence community, as each collects national intelligence or intelligence related to national security, which may have a profound impact on Homeland Security. Several agencies or organizations that compose both various federal partners, some outside the intelligence community, such as the National Counterterrorism Center, the National Counterintelligence Center, the National Counterproliferation Center, and the Open Source Intelligence Center. Other partners may include the 14 existing private sector information sharing and analyst centers, the scores of state and local law enforcement entities charged with gathering criminal intelligence, numerous state and regional intelligence fusion centers, and federal agencies with law enforcement responsibilities which may collect intelligence related to national security. This group collectively creates a holistic approach that implies an interdependency between the diverse players of the statutory IC and a broader Homeland Security community that involves various levels of government, private sector partners, and various organizations that is a mixture of all the groups. While the readings provided this chart that describes Homeland Security intelligence and how various forms of intelligence, such as foreign intelligence, domestic intelligence, and military intelligence, overlap with one another to create what is called Homeland Security intelligence, I prefer this model. This is one that is issue-driven. By this I mean that Homeland Security is defined by the issue. Homeland Security intelligence is defined by the issue being faced rather than the purpose of the intelligence or the source of the intelligence. The reason for this is because many of the threats that we face are transnational in nature. That is to say that while the threats may be global in impact, while the threats may be global in nature, its impact is felt locally. And the reverse is true as well. While the impact of an event is local, the effects may be felt globally. As you can see, there is several different types of activities that overlap between national security and national intelligence, foreign intelligence, and domestic intelligence. And it is where this overlap of these issues occurs that we look at the issue and we see Homeland Security. At this time, I would ask you to go to Blackboard, go to the discussion sections on Blackboard, read the discussion questions for Section 2, and answer those discussion questions. Don't forget to respond to other students' posts and also respond to those comments or questions made about your post in order to complete the discussion questions for this section.